Welcome to SUITEWORLD 2021, Automating Grants Administration with Piango. Piango is a proud digital event. Feel free to submit questions to the chat area. We are monitoring the chat, and we will get back to you with any questions not addressed at the end of the session. Next, let me introduce our speakers today. Mark Broussel, leading procurement expert and industry analyst, and Sean Northrup, Deputy Director of MPO. Mark, why don't you provide an overview of the challenges many government agencies deal with?
Managing grants can be complex, time-consuming, and risky. Organizations have got to deal with multiple stakeholders and multiple locations, multiple departments, lots of administrative tasks, lots of project requirements, and, oh yes, ever-increasing regulations. And many organizations are using spreadsheets to manage their grants. Some organizations, well, they try to manage grants by modifying systems that were designed for other purposes. And all of these are the reasons that more and more organizations are automating their grants processes. Automated solutions help organizations, big and small, with full grant management and accounting, matching of grants with other funding sources, automated direct and indirect cost calculations, and even pass-through sub-award expense management. Automating grants and sub-award management, well, it provides big benefits to organizations: streamlined operations, better accuracy, reduced compliance burden, streamlined communication, better collaboration, and enhanced visibility.
Sean, tell us a little bit about Indianapolis MPO and your role in the organization.
Sure, happy to. I'm the Deputy Director at the Indianapolis Metropolitan Planning Organization. We're a unit of government. We're a regional entity, so we have a board made up of every city, town, and county in central Indiana around Indianapolis. We cover about 1,500 square miles and about 2 million people in population. Our role as a governmental entity is to make sure that federal gas tax money that flows back into our region gets spent in accordance with the wishes of local elected officials, so that decisions aren't being made for how infrastructure projects get spent at the federal level or state level. We have all of the mayors and town council presidents and county commissioners and transit agencies all come together quarterly around a table with us, and we make decisions about how those investments are going to be made and how we're going to prioritize transportation investments for the next 25 years. We receive approximately $55 million a year from the federal government. Every major region of over 50,000 people in the country has an MPO, an organization similar to us that has at very least a planning and infrastructure allocation program like we do.
Why is grants strategically important at Indianapolis MPO?
Grants management is foundational to what we do. All of the grants that we receive from the federal government require a match, and our job every year is to spend those grants down. So it's funny, every time we work with business consultants, we say we're not like a lot of private enterprise. Our profit, we have no profit margin at all. Our job is to get money every year and spend that money down to zero every year or within a year afterwards. Most of the grants that pay for our operations are an 80-20 match. So 80% of this expenditure needs to be the federal grant that we receive. And then there's an additional 20% that comes from local match. And that's the dues that all of our 36 member organizations pay to us. The cities, towns, and counties around Indianapolis, pay that match on the dues each year. And so all of our expenses, when they go out 80% federal and 20% local for the entire cost.
What are the most important features you were looking for in an ERP solution?
There were a few things that were big priorities for us. One was transparency and knowing where we stand on all of our grants. Like I said, our job is to spend our grants down to zero every year. And so we had to know how much money was encumbered and how much we had left to contract. And that's central to how we operate the organization. It was a very hard number to figure out in our previous environment. Within PeopleSoft, we used a number of reports that we built our own custom Excel workbook out of, I think I had 3 or 4 pivot tables that I would update just to try and come down to that one number. How much have we expended? How much is encumbered? And then how much do we have left to contract? And then be able to report that back out on a monthly basis to the state. Where do we stand? What have we done with your grant money? How much more is coming? When are these projects going to be done? So that was really key, was knowing where we stood. And then the other big key, if I had to say, which was more important, I'd say they were probably 1 and 2. They were probably close to 50-50. The other one was just compliance, making sure that we could pass an audit on our own. One of the nice things about being a division of the city of Indianapolis was that we were a little bit buried when it came audit time. The city did an internal single audit and then would spot check for different grants that they would focus on. And we got selected every year, but it was not a big deal. And the city had a very large staff to really focus on and help us through our finances. We had a CFO that was assigned to us that was able to manage those things. We lost all of those resources when we moved out on our own, and our audit requirements became much more stringent. We are now subject to a single audit from the state auditor, which they move in and watch you for a while and really embed and figure out, what's going on with the finances. We needed to be able to pass that. We needed to be able to say with a straight face that we are good stewards of taxpayer dollars. We are spending them in appropriate ways, and we need to be able to document that and show that, as competently as possible. And we have no accountants on staff. We have a team of planners and coders and financial managers and things like that, large grants managers, but we do not have an accountant on staff. So we had to staff up quickly with consultants and build our own capacity through this contract and in building out NetSuite for us.
Tell me about the benefits MPO has achieved with an automated grants management solution.
We've gone kind of interchangeably between government and nonprofit when we're talking about NetSuite. And I just wanted to clarify that we use the NetSuite nonprofit instance. It's worked very well for us. We fit well into it. We've changed some of the names to kind of match up with our terminology. That's been like a really small change, but it's been really good. Piango kind of being built on the NetSuite platform and being seamless is absolutely true. It's got its own tab. It's tied to each one of the transactions that we do. Like I said, it's hard as a user to differentiate, I think, between one and the other sometimes, just because it is incredibly seamless. I think if it had been a separate process, it could have been tricky for us to kind of keep track of the budgeting separate from the day-to-day financial tracking. So I'm very thankful that the two are very combined. We stay in compliance on our grants. We know where we stand at any given time. That's a huge change. It takes a lot less staff time to try and figure it out. It probably saves us, I would say, 2 to 4 hours a week, kind of in oversight on doing that in staff time. We can report on the budgets much, much more easily to the state. We see our grant balances. We did a custom report with Piango early on that was just a total game changer, where we calculated that grant amount to contract. And that's kind of the central number that management uses here at the MPO to know what we need to take on and do. And so that's been, the single most useful thing of the entire effort, I would say.
Piango provides a full grants management lifecycle product built on top of the NetSuite platform. This means that your data is 100% integrated and your user experience is the same as any other NetSuite application. And from a security perspective, you're using the same secure platform as all of the rest of your NetSuite application. Not only can grants be tracked, we also provide a full accounting solution to make sure that all of your expenses and revenue associated with grants are properly booked within the NetSuite accounting system. Grants typically start at the fundraising perspective or identifying which grants to be applied for a particular organization. And we can manage those proposals all the way through to an award process. And then we can set up various terms and conditions required for that particular grant. Grants can be allocated to projects, programs, or even subawards. And then finally, a grant can be closed out once the term has been completed. When allocating grants to outbound grants, this scenario means that we are providing a sub-award to another organization that would actually provide the services direct, maybe in a different country. We can promote the idea of these funding opportunities, receive applications for those funding opportunities, generate awards, disperse the funds, and then track these expenses. All of this, again, is done on top of the NetSuite platform and integrated with your core financials. Now, let's move into NetSuite. From the standard NetSuite dashboard, we can see our grants related items, and we can then drill down and look at all of our grants. In this demo, we're assuming we're an organization that is providing research for various veteran affairs. And we have received a particular grant called the Wounded Warrior Research Grant. We can track a variety of attributes for this particular grant, such as its detailed description, who the sponsor is, and just by hovering over various items, we can see the integration within NetSuite, and we can link back to the standard customer record within NetSuite. We can identify the status of the grant, and this provides that full lifecycle tracking that is capable within Piengo Grants, the total amount of the grant, who is in charge of the grant, and whether the grant is a single year, multi-year, etc., and priority. All of these attributes can be configured, added to, hidden, etc. We also track a wide variety of financials. What has been awarded in total, what has been awarded in a fiscal year, and as well as we can do multiple currencies. We can provide the timeline of the grant as far as when the grant starts, when it ends, when it was applied for, and a variety of other attributes. A grant may have sub-grants associated with it. In this case, we have this bipolar disorder research grant and a PTSD related grant. These total amounts of the sub-grants will add up, including specific grants for this particular grant, to our total of $450,000. We can track when grants are expected to receive funding, and then when payments are actually received, you can recognize revenue through standard NetSuite processes. For each grant, you can identify a variety of milestones. Milestones typically are related to reports or project evaluations. Any of these can be customized, and we will send out notifications to the appropriate people responsible and the team on predefined timelines. So whether that's 2 weeks or 4 weeks in advance of this particular milestone. Normally, grants come with terms and conditions. These terms and conditions can be attached over in the files area to be able to track all of your contracts that you might have related to a grant, as well as you can list out specific terms that are going to be achievable for this particular grant, whether this is minority participation, which is more informational, or direct and indirect cost share terms that are set up to be able to charge back for a cost reimbursable grant. Many grants can be billed back to the donor, and we set up a allowable set of expenses that could potentially be charged to the donor either as a direct cost or an indirect cost. And you can identify specific GL accounts, departments, and locations that you might charge back to. Each particular charge could have a cap amount that could be allocated for this particular grant. Piengo will then sweep through all expense-related transactions and generate invoices to the donor. And we can see that here by taking a look at the grant revenue and grant expense details. So for each grant, we can identify all of the vendor bills that have been charged against this particular grant. And then we can take a look at our grant revenue and see invoices that have been created as a result of those expenses. If I click over here, I can look at that particular invoice. So notice that it was an indirect cost recovery that we've been charging to our donor. And we identify all of the expenses and which vendor bills that they came from. This can then be transmitted to the donor for payment, and you would go through your normal NetSuite receivables process to accept payments. In addition to direct or indirect costs that might be related to, say, rent or utilities, we can also track employee allocations to our grant. So you can identify which employees are working on this particular grant and what their overall percentage of allocations should be to this grant. This information can then be collected from your payroll imports into NetSuite, and then the billable hours could potentially be charged back to the donor if that is your business process. Many times, grants are received from an organization that requires matching. This could be either internal or general funds, or it could be other grants that have also been received, and you may need to do a matching percentage. Could be dollar for dollar, or in this example, a 25% match from the Homeless Wounded Warrior grant. Again, we can track the total cap amount. So this means that the Homeless Wounded Warrior could fund this Wounded Warrior research grant up to $20,000 at a 25% rate. We can then track the specific transactions and line items that have been charged from the matched grant to this particular target grant. We also may want to be able to track modifications to our grant. Whenever a grant is edited and, for example, the principal investigator has been changed or an end date has been changed, we will log this in a nice user-friendly way to see a history of changes for that particular grant. Now let's take a look at some key grant reports that can be generated on a grant-by-grant basis and also for a user-defined date range. So I can do an annual, quarterly, or really any type of snapshot for a particular grant, and I can generate a revenue and expense report. Now, this revenue and expense report is a quick and simple way to look at all of the revenue and expenses for a particular grant within a time range. We can also generate the federal financial report information that many organizations are required to report. This is the 425 report, and we populate that with data based upon the date range that has been selected for each of your grants. And since Grants is built on top of the NetSuite platform, we can leverage many of their built-in save search capabilities as well as KPIs. So we can see on the dashboard here, quarterly grant awards over time, as well as we can look at grant amounts by grant administrator. So you might have several people in charge of your grants and identify who's in charge of a certain dollar amount of the various grants. Thank you for listening to Piengo Grants Management.